Well, it has been a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Welcome.
Welcome, welcome. We have had a busy month. We haven't been here for a little bit, and but we did get together on a sunny day outdoors to celebrate our birthdays.
Yes. Happy birthday, Gavita.
Happy birthday, Janet! So many birthdays,
Thank you.
and I'm glad we got to do it this year. So we've got a Pisces and an Aries here coming back together to talk. And so this conversation actually comes out of something that we talked about on that beautiful day outdoors, which is our mutual love for stories and storytelling and hearing stories from around the world.
Yes.
Is that what we're here for today?
Yes. Excellent. Okay. You start. You tell us about storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we both read and watch stories, watch movies and shows and series from around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we both, I think, have learned so much from our reading and our watching, just getting glimpses into other parts of the world and our
Mm-hmm.
own histories and the histories of our people and the histories of people around the world. And Janet, you had talked about a quote when we got together that if you like, you could maybe share because I think it really helped me to see things in a different way.
Yes. And in terms of storytelling, we realize that historical fiction is a real charge because it not only gives us history that we may not have learned of in schooling, but the history of human existence on this planet is so important. And so when we deal with historical fiction, we have history and a story. And the story is of human life. And it may be fictional, but it likely happened somewhere to someone.
That's right.
And so this particular poet said of Anna Karenina, which is a Tolstoy novel, that Anna Karenina didn't just give us um, a work of art, it gave us a piece of life. And that's what historical fiction and storytelling gives us, a piece of life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I found that so profound when you shared that with me, because I think that is what I've loved about reading and watching stories that are being told to help me understand history. That's
Hmm.
not in a history book and not just facts, but weaving it in
Dates.
and not just facts and dates, which is important because I think it sometimes helps me understand those facts and dates better.
Hmm.
But it's being woven into this fictional story that helps me understand the humanity of the people who lived through that time.
Hmm. Yes,
And
important.
sometimes it has also helped me to connect things that might have been going on in different parts of the world that maybe I learned about these facts learning about European history or these facts learning about US history or these facts learning about Asian history or whatever it may be, but through a story you can see that it was all actually happening at once, and we don't often
Hmm.
learn it that way. We don't learn about a period in terms of what was going on around the world, or at least I haven't. I'm not as I was
Yeah,
never.
most of us haven't. Yes. And if we could just do a timeline
Mhm.
and put countries on that timeline, we would find that a lot of the same things were going on at the same time.
Yeah,
And that's important to know
yeah,
about the energy on the planet. You know, we are on a planet together while we may be separated by country and all of that. But the forces at play are very, very interesting. So I like to read um, authors from all over the world.
hmm
I don't like to restrict myself And I used to. At one point in my youth, I was only reading women.
Mm.
And then at another point, I was only reading Black women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I was only reading Black men. So that involved James Baldwin,
Mm-hmm.
name somebody else. I'm having a hard time. But anyway, you see where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
where we restrict ourselves, but someone who puts a pen to paper is worth reading.
Yeah.
I don't care where they came from.
And I like what you're saying about different perspectives and not limiting ourselves to one. Something that's often been said is that history is written by the victors. And so
Mhm.
often it happens, at least the history books that we read, the so-called approved history, is
Mhm.
written by the people who won,
Yeah.
right? So we then lose the stories and the impact that those moments in history had on the people who were oppressed or
Yeah.
marginalized or
Or
get
conquered. Or
what was
mhm.
that? And what did you say?
I said, or conquered.
Or conquered or
Yes.
conquered. They get lost because
Mhm.
they're not valued enough. That perspective does not get value to put into a history book. And
Yeah.
so many times, and I think in so many of our cultures, history is passed down through storytelling. And there's
Yeah.
oral history tradition, there's folklore
Mhm.
tradition, that our histories get preserved, maybe not in a history book, but in these other ways. And that continues to today. We're telling our stories through other medium that never makes it to a history classroom, of
Yes.
real experiences by real people that lived through those times.
Mhm. So, what have you seen? What movie or book have you read lately that gave you some insight into history that you were not privy to previously?
Yeah, yeah. Well, these are like no particular order. It's just like what hits us in a moment of time. Right now,
Yes.
at the moment, I've been very tuned into Korean dramas on Netflix, or what
Mm.
often found on Netflix, which I do appreciate because it's not a world that I knew as much about.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so right now, I'm in the process of watching Mr. Sunshine. Doesn't sound
Oh.
what it is because the name, it doesn't become clear till about halfway through. Um, but it's based in the late 1800s in Korea,
Mm.
as the land of Korea. Joseon at that time was,
Mm-hmm.
the empire, the Joseon Empire, the Great Joseon Empire was being fought over by all these powers that were major powers of the time. And it's a history that I know very little about. It brings up the US history from that time, the Japanese imperialism,
Mm.
the US imperialism, British imperialism. There's allusions made to China at that time and the Philippines
Mm-hmm.
and the Spanish American War and what that did to the Philippines.
Oh, yes,
Uh,
yes.
so
And this is before Korea was split
this is
into North Korea and South Korea.
yeah, Russia is mentioned in the
Mm-hmm.
series, and I'm not done yet, and I'm certainly not going to give any spoilers. I think it's very much worth watching, and the story is woven through this love story, as
Mm.
often happens in historical fiction, so
Yeah.
that seeing the impact on different parts of Korean life,
Mm-hmm.
and it also brings into play the dynamics within Joseon of the nobility and the working class and the slave class, and those internal dynamics and how they played out as people made choices as Korea was being conquered. What choices did they make based on where they were
Mm.
in their class and where they were in terms of selling out their own country, betraying their country,
Ah.
fighting for their country, trying to
Mm-hmm.
maintain their country, all of those choices which got influenced with where they were in the stratification of their society. And it, it's fiction, it's historical fiction. I can't say how much is true or how much it isn't, but it gives me a glimpse into all the things that went into those wars of that time, and how it,
Mhm.
you can easily see, would have impacted people depending on where they sat in society.
Yes.
It's
So,
very much worth watching.
oh, I bet
Now becoming
it's.
an ad, which is not what it's meant to be.
But you see, through, and this wasn't only happening in Korea. This was happening in other parts of the world
Yeah.
where we have a class designation. Um, there's colonialism, royalty. You mentioned a royal class. There's all kinds of ways to separate people and put them in a box.
Yes.
So it wasn't only going on in Korea, it was going on in Southeast Asia, Malaysia.
Mhm.
Um, it tried to go on in China. China is one of the strongholds in terms of colonialism.
Mhm.
We've mentioned before that
Yeah.
the Western powers had trading posts on the Bund in China, but the West never really got into China to colonialize them.
They never got hold of it.
They never got hold of it, though Japan did fight a war with China.
Yeah.
And as little as Japan is, Japan fought a war with Russia. You know,
Yeah.
Japan occupied Indochina, Malaysia. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
But I find uh, some of my most interesting reading has been historical fiction. And one of the books that I loved, I heard on NPR radio, there's a World Book Club that comes on late on the first Saturday of the month.
Wow.
And I learned of this Malaysian author who wrote a book called The Garden of Evening Mists.
Mm.
And this scenario takes place in Malaysia, where the Japanese had occupied. Now, I knew, because of my Chinese history knowledge, I knew of the Japanese in China,
Yeah.
but I didn't know of the Japanese in Malaysia.
I don't think I should read it.
It's an excellent read, and it has in addition to the history, it has so much beautiful intricacies of both cultures,
Mm.
you know? So what we have to understand, I think, in all these warring scenarios is that people are people, and while the soldiers are doing the fighting, the other people are just living and being themselves, and we're
Right.
beautiful and we're spiritual, you
People
know?
have relationships and families and are trying to live their lives, trying to make
That's
it.
right. We're artistic, we're creative.
People are falling in love. People are, taking
Yes.
families, and
Hmm.
people are making decisions for their everyday lives that they feel are right at the time.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and then some are making decisions, to as I'm seeing in this current show of making decisions that they might later regret.
Hmm. Hmm.
All of that is happening. And like we talk about Japanese imperialism and colonialism, which impacted so many people, and histories that I need to read, like what you just mentioned in Malaysia.
Hmm.
And at the same time, they were being influenced by world powers.
Yeah.
So there's a line in the show that I'm watching where at some point someone from Joseon questions, why is America not helping us? And an
Mm.
American answers, America's in it with Japan. The words are not quite this. The America's backing Japan. They're not going to help you. And we forget that there's world influence and politics going on. That
Yes.
and not to let Japan off the hook in any way, because they made their choices, but
Hmm.
as that small country, it was also not impervious to the influence of the world powers of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, another movie we can mention, Casablanca, rooted in history, but just very romantic.
Hmm.
And for years, that's all I saw it as, the
Wow.
romance, you know. But every time they mentioned Vichy and Vichy water and Vichy France, I'm like, well, what was that?
That, yeah.
No, nobody told me about that.
They don't teach
But
you that in history
they
class.
don't teach you that in history class, you know?
Yeah.
And so we have different factions fighting these wars and vying for power that we're not always privy to. Mhm.
Yeah, and so of course, it always takes me back to what's happened in India. Um, and there's been a couple of movies that have been important for my learning and understanding that are historical fiction made about India, especially around the partition time. Uh,
Yeah.
so one of them is Lagan. I think I
Mhm.
mentioned that to you. Lagan is about British colonialism in India, and it's about the tensions with the farmers in a small village and the British Empire being
Mhm.
in rule in the ruling class, and then the struggle that takes place through a cricket match, and
Mm.
the beautiful love story with beautiful Bollywood songs, but based on a story of a soccer match that really happened between a village and Britain. Uh,
Mm.
and it just speaks to, just kind of, again, glimpse of life of
Mhm.
how this was impacting people on the ground.
Mhm.
And then the other one that always comes to mind is the movie Earth. Uh,
Oh, yes.
yes, which is based in Pakistan and is about the partition, the events leading up to the partition and then the partition happening,
Mm.
as the British drew a line and said, you belong here and you belong there, and it doesn't matter where you grew up or were born or where your family is, but this is where you belong. And there was mass migration and lots of death.
And the West did the same thing in Korea. Korea is North Korea and South Korea today because of that same split.
Same split.
And
uh,
it's so
and Israel,
inhumane.
Israel and Palestine was the British drawing a line
That's
around
right.
that same time. And
Hmm.
for now generations, the two sides that were pitted against each other continue to fight each other and see each other as the enemy, when
Hmm.
really it was an artificial line drawn by the outside power.
The outsider.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. And the fight continues.
And the fight continues. And at some point, all of us need to understand this and come together and just give up that fight.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
give it
But it
up.
takes understanding that story, right? It takes understanding what
Yeah.
really happened, because it doesn't get written into the history books that way. It gets written into Indians and Pakistanis being barbarians and fighting each other. It doesn't get written into it with any accountability for the European powers that drew these lines.
Yes. And
After,
when I was in sixth,
I'm
what'd you
sorry,
say?
say this, draw these lines after colonizing and tormenting the land and the people, and then leaving with these artificial, it doesn't get written in with the accountability on the Europeans who did all that.
Yes. When I was in sixth grade, I had an excellent sixth grade teacher. I love her dearly till today. And two things stood out to me in social studies, because, when you're in sixth grade, you have the same teacher for all subjects.
Yeah.
And in the social studies section, one of them was learning to pronounce Czechoslovakia. I'm so
Mhm.
proud I can do that now.
Great.
But how um, Constantinople became Istanbul,
Right.
that bothered me.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough said about it. And then the partition in India,
Yeah.
because I knew what the word partition meant.
Yeah.
But
What
the
a
way
horrible
they,
thing to happen to a people.
yeah, the way they discussed it in the history text didn't make sense to me. And so throughout time, throughout my life, the things I've encountered to help me to understand what that
Yeah.
was kind of culminated in a movie I saw on Netflix, Mango Dreams.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was just how a man had been separated from his very brother,
Yeah.
and all his life they didn't know the other existed, thought the other was dead.
Dead.
Yeah, that just, here in America, we have suffered some things, but I always knew where my brother was.
Mm.
I always knew where he was.
Wow.
So we have to understand that humanity is, we're just all feeling, we have such pain,
Wow, Janet.
and we have to help to put a salve on our pain.
Janet, the way you just shared that, I think that is the power of storytelling through
Mm,
sometimes fictional stories that
mhm,
get to our hearts, right?
mm,
We relate to these people who seem to be in these far off situation, far off places, far off,
yes.
living in a different time, and they seem so far away
Mhm,
because of the situation they're in. But because of the storytelling, we can
mm,
relate to them with something
yes.
we feel that
Yes.
I don't feel when I just read it. As I said, I was never a good student of history. I didn't read the history books. I read them just enough to write the report I needed to write or to take the
That's
test.
right. And to pass the test.
Test,
Yes.
test. But hearing these stories in a way now, and sometimes there's historical non-fictional stories too. But what you
Mhm.
said about Mango Dreams, where through this fictional story, you were able to relate to someone or empathize with him, what it would be like to not know where your brother is,
That's right.
and it changes the story because it makes it something that you can feel in your heart. It makes it
Yeah.
real. I
It
think
makes it personal.
of these. I think that's why you and I both, love these kinds of stories so much.
Mhm.
Personally, I will say about Mango Dreams, I think you know this already. I didn't love Mango Dreams. I didn't. And maybe it's because, movies like Lagan and Earth, both of which were made by Indian or Earth was actually made by an Indo-Canadian woman, but both of those movies were made with the Indian perspective. Whereas
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure Mango Dreams was made from a European lens, from an
Mhm.
American lens. And I feel like there was something missing in it for me.
Yes.
Didn't capture it didn't capture it for me. Uh,
Mhm.
and part of it was there's an inherent class structure that's evident in the movie that
Mhm.
is never acknowledged.
Never came through.
Never acknowledged that, the main character is of a certain class,
Mhm.
his story becomes important. He's a doctor, etc. And then the other people around him who I care about just as deeply
Mhm.
never get any resolution. And I think
Yes.
because of an outside lens that and yeah. So
We have to understand who's making the movies
who's
and
making
where
the
they're coming from.
that's it. Who's making the movie?
Mhm.
And what you said earlier about sometimes you were just reading Black authors or Black female authors or Black male authors, how important it is to notice who's doing the writing
That's
is
right.
so key because then it helps you understand the perspective. So for
Mhm.
Lagan and Earth were all that, and Mango Dreams just felt like something's missing. And I went and looked at
Something was missing.
just wasn't quite there for me. And I
Yeah.
still understand and can see how the story can be impactful, especially in the way you just related it to your brother.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, something was just missing. But you know, um, who's writing the story is so, so important in
Because it's impacting so many people around the world. You know, it's being shown around the world.
yeah, yeah,
And it helps shape our perspectives. We
yeah,
need to be conscious of that.
yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
actually think the person who helped me understand that was Spike Lee.
Mm.
You know,
Oh, Spike.
right? We talked about him when we met the other day, but that just came to me. I think I understood it because Spike Lee made a point of talking about how important it was for him to be telling these stories. You know, I
Hmm.
think in a similar way, Ava DuVernay plays that role, uh,
That's right.
and many others. You know,
Hmm.
but telling the story through a specific analysis, understanding the structure of what was going on. You know, and these are not historical fiction, but storytelling that happened through Malcolm X, both the book and the movie.
Hmm. Hmm.
Historical nonfiction, but that
Hmm.
storytelling was important, not from a white lens. And then similarly, we talked about the movie White Tiger, which is
Mm.
fiction. I don't believe there's any historical piece in it, but and Ava DuVernay was involved in that one, by the way,
That's right.
made by
It's
Indian.
having an eye
Yes,
on the situation.
on the situation.
And
Yeah,
and it's about truth. Uh it's not about glamour and Hollywood or Bollywood. You know,
right.
it's about truth.
It's
And the
about
truth is
showing the
clear. The
situation
truth is
as it is.
clear.
Yeah, what's
Hmm.
happening really, and
Really.
White Tiger is made by Indian filmmakers, but Ava DuVernay, I believe, is one of the producers, and she
Yes.
certainly, along with the other filmmakers, had an eye to the class
Hmm.
divisions that really are what's highlighted in White Tiger,
Hmm.
um, and the power dynamics, you know,
Yes.
happen. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, speaking of that, I'm going to bring up another movie, and maybe this will be controversial, but I think also one of the earliest movies that helped me realize that who's telling the story matters is Gone with the Wind. I
Mm.
will acknowledge now publicly on, you know, this is public. I've never seen it. I've never seen Gone with the Wind. Never watched it. I remember I was at a friend's house in, I think, middle school, maybe high school, junior high. We didn't have middle schools back then.
That's
Um,
right.
and my friend put it on as one of her favorites, and I couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch it. I just couldn't watch it. It was too,
Wow.
I didn't know. I was still young enough. I'd only been in this country maybe 5 years, maybe six. I didn't have a full understanding of the history of this country, especially
Hmm.
slavery, the Civil War.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And so this movie comes on, and I'm like, I'm supposed to be rooting for her, and I just couldn't watch it. So I've still never seen it. But it helped me realize how important it was to understand the perspective that the movie or the story was being told through.
Yes. Now, I, as a young girl, probably older than you at the time from when you first encountered it, went to New York on a bus trip with my Girl Scout troop to see Gone with the Wind. All black, you know, my life was black. I was not involved with white people as a youngster. I mean, there were white people in my community. But
Mhm.
from my church and my Girl Scout troop, I went to New York to see Gone with the Wind,
Wow.
primarily because it was the film of the era.
Hmm.
That was one thing. And it told the truth of that Civil War.
Yeah.
So even though Scarlett O'Hara was the harem, I mean the harlot that, you know, was the star, there was more to see for we black kids. And they wanted us to see it.
That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
I saw it. Yes, it was very interesting.
And,
Hmm.
you know, I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to, you know, I mean, certainly.
Well, we'll have to have a night of watching Scarlett
Oh,
O'Hara,
please.
where she tells him where no, who told her? Who's the guy? Clark Gable?
I have not seen it. I knew
I
none
think
of
it's Clark
that.
Gable at the end says, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn.
Yes, I've heard that line. I've never seen it. Is that crazy?
Because Scarlett was the typical Southern belle who wanted everything her way and
Mhm.
didn't have to do much to get it.
You know,
And
and like since then I've read, or even I think I saw something or read an interview with Hattie McDaniel where she speaks about how important it was to forward, um, having Black female actors,
yes.
major roles. So I get that, but like I said, I've never seen it. I couldn't tell you who's in it, other than maybe Hattie.
Yeah, and part of our race has been opposed to the role that Hattie McDaniel played, but there were not roles for Hattie McDaniel to play at that time.
No,
And the
what
fact
else?
that she made an inroad into that was major,
That's right.
you know? And I think back on all of that as to why it was important for me to get on that bus and go to New York
Mhm.
and see that movie.
That's right.
As a young girl, I mean, I don't know if I was a Girl Scout or a Brownie. I could have been a Brownie,
That is young.
but they thought it was important for us to see this,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? And another, I think Hattie McDaniel was in The Imitation of Life.
Mm,
That's another historic film where a young Southern girl had a Black mother and she kind of shunned her.
okay.
And it's called The Imitation of Life.
Hmm.
It's very painful. It's very real. And a lot of white people, I mean, a lot of mixed people have passed in this country for white to accept the advantages that whiteness offered them. And it can be very hurtful to a Black mother
Mm,
who has a mixed child. So that's what that's about. It was interesting. Yeah.
wow.
So storytelling. The stories we can tell.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
and are so important. It's important now. There are writers who are writing about this time that are going to be
Mhm.
really important in the future. And it's not always the popular ones. And I think it's important to just always be looking at who's telling this story,
That's right.
because that's where you really get to, and um, is it being told from the person who lived it,
That's right.
right? Right.
That's most important.
Yeah, I just thought of another one that I think we've discussed before, the tattooist of Auschwitz.
Oh, can you imagine? Who better could tell that story?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Any story in those walls in that setting.
yeah, to
Mhm.
understand, and you can read it from the outside of what happened and how horrifying and cruel it was, but
Mhm.
this is a story, and it's actually written as told by the main character to a friend who then wrote it up.
Mm.
It's because the person who lived through it and
Yes.
survived and was able to share that story with someone who then committed to writing it.
And there's a difference between writing in triumph than writing in failure or demise. There's a beauty. Well, there's beauty in everything, but that's important what you just said to me, that this was a survivor.
This is a survival story, and
Mm-hmm.
showing what he experienced and the full cruelty of it. Probably
Mm-hmm.
not even the full cruelty. I'm sure much got edited out,
Mm-hmm.
but sharing what it was really like from the inside, but having survived it and being able
Victory,
to share it.
victory is such a grand portrayal to people in a story. I mean, when we can conquer and claim victory,
Yeah.
you know, victory is mine. That's a hymn that's sung
Mm,
in the Baptist Christian church.
mhm.
You know, victory is mine. Victory is mine. I'm so glad the victory is mine. I'm so glad. You know, there's a lot to be said for that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, a lot to be said for that. And we have to claim victory all the time. I read something recently that, um, oh, I can't remember the beginning, but something turns into hope.
Hmm.
It's some struggle that turns into hope. And hope is what gets us to victory. Mhm.
That is beautiful. And
Yeah,
so true.
and true. That's right.
Wow.
We've had a good time today.
We have been around the world. Maybe not around the whole world. Maybe there's some areas of the world that I still need to explore through.
Oh, we all do.
I mean,
Yes.
we talked about travel in these conversations, but I've gone further in my mind through
Mm,
and watching stories than from traveling because
yes.
you really get to see somebody else's experience. And there is a lot I have never read that I need to explore because, it's where what I haven't what don't know yet.
Yes. And it's all out there for all of us. None of us know everything or have explored everything, but we intend to.
Yeah. None of us need to go further than, our bookstore or a library or sometimes just Netflix to
Mhm.
to understand the world.
Yes. Yes. And as we talk, as we open our lives to people that we encounter, we can find a great richness there. Hmm.
You know what, Janet, that is so important. And, you know, it really, I think the conversations that you and I have had over how many years,
30,
I think has
31.
let's just say it's 30, um, have been a piece of that for me.
Hmm.
I think it's been a piece of that for both of us. It
Hmm.
helped us expand our world. And I think that's a really good point you made. I didn't think that was going to come up today, but there's reading, there's watching movies, but then there's actually getting to know people.
That's it.
That's really where our storytelling is most important.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can only do that. We can't talk about what's going on in a foreign land if we haven't been there and encountered the people who are living through their lives.
Yeah.
We read what we read in the newspaper or see what we see on the news. But like Anthony Bourdain, if you don't go there and see the culture and enjoy the food and actually engage with people,
Right.
you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
You
And that,
can't speak about it.
and
You
that
know?
applies to going to the next neighborhood over.
That's
I
it.
saying it's not about traveling the world. It's about opening your mind and your heart and
And just moving
ears.
through
Yeah.
through your life,
Yeah. That's
through
right.
your environment.
Yeah.
That's right. I encounter people here where I live, which is a very well racially balanced neighborhood,
Mhm.
but there are people who won't lift their eyes
Mm,
as I pass them.
so sad.
They won't even lift their eyes. I speak anyway and keep going. How do you encounter life and not acknowledge it?
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't care if it's a person, a tree, a fish, a dog.
All life.
It's
How do you?
life. We
It's
are life. Yeah. Yeah. I'm on the last leg of my journey, and I pray it's long still, but there's so much yet I want to address
mm,
because we're such special beings and we're blessed to be here, and we need to be doing more.
yeah.
We need to do more.
We do. We do.
Mhm.
You just brought around this conversation to somewhere I didn't know it was going to go, and I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful place to end, where we're really just back to where we are and who we
Mhm.
are, and connecting with the others around us. I think that's where
That's
it'll.
right. Yeah. Life is good, sweetie.
Yeah.
Cheers. My glass is not completely empty.
Oh, mine. Cheers.
Oh, you're full.
Oh, oh, it's empty. I'm
Oh,
down
is it? Oh,
here.
let's fill up. Let's
We
fill up.
will.
We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Hope it won't be too long. And stay well. Be safe.
See you all soon. Don't
Mhm.
forget to like and subscribe
Oh, thank you. Yes.
and comment, because we want to know what you've read or what you've been thinking about. Just put it in the comments.
Yes. Interact with us. Mhm. Push the button.